Okay, it's 11 now. I think we can start the session. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our research webinar today. So today we have Dr. Jasly here to share with us his topic on data visualization for new researchers, a crash course in effective communication. So I'll briefly introduce Dr. Jasly. Dr. Jasly is a senior lecturer and also a STEM coordinator in the Faculty of Dentistry, University Malaya. So he is also a certified trainer under the Human Resource Development Corporation, under the Ministry of Human Resources. So he's very experienced in conducting impactful communication and science team training sessions for young researchers and youth working in multinational companies and also all the research students. So I'm sure Dr. Jasly has a lot to share with us today. Okay, so I'll pass the floor to you, Dr. Jasly.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ngoy. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can see the slides. I checked with Dr. Ngoy just now and she said everything's okay. So hopefully everything really is okay. Okay, so first I would like to just briefly lay out what I have planned for today's 1-hour webinar. It will be a very basic, as you can see in the title here, a crash course. And it is also targeted at new researchers. So I will be covering some of the very basic concepts of data visualization. However, this webinar will not be a technical skills kind of workshop. I won't focus on, for example, software that you can use. I won't focus on the technical aspects of creating graphs or tables, because I feel like those things are not really the problem with many new researchers when it comes to data visualization. I feel like students or new researchers, they need a little bit of training, more focused towards the actual act of designing their presentation slides when presenting data. So that will be what I aim to achieve today. And also, before I begin, I would like to request, since this is a webinar and this is not like a live session, usually in live sessions, speakers would talk for the entire duration, and then towards the end of the session, they will have a Q&A session. But because this is online and we are using Zoom, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the platform. There is a chat window. So the way I like to do my webinars is I like to have a fully interactive session, a two-way session throughout the entire webinar. So I don't really like to have question and answers at the end. I would rather, if you have any comments or if you have any questions, just type it in the chat. I have it open on my second monitor, and then I will incorporate a question directly into my presentation, directly into the webinar. All right. So please be active in the chat box. If you don't have questions, you can just leave like comments, or if you have your own experiences that you'd like to share about something I've said, please share in the chat. All right. Just to practice, can I have some people just acknowledge what I'm saying and reply in the chat? All right, I got one response from Tan Chuan, Dr. Tengku, Vidya. Hello, Vidya. All right, okay, so thank you. So yeah, I don't want to be speaking just to my webcam for like 1 hour, okay? So in order to feel like this is an actual live session, I would very much appreciate some live interactions through the chat box, okay? So again, if you have any comments, any questions, don't feel shy, just share the chat box and I will incorporate it into my webinar. All right. So to begin, has anybody ever seen this PowerPoint slide? If you have, let me know. If not, it's okay. Just let me know also. I just want to get a rough estimate of if you have seen this slide before. Anyone? No. Okay. So I think majority of you have not. Okay. This is actually an actual PowerPoint slide that was delivered by the US Army in, I think, 2010, so about 14 years ago. And apparently, the purpose of this slide was to show how sophisticated or how complicated the US Army's military process was at the time. Okay, if that was their purpose, to showcase how confusing and how interconnected everything is, then you can say that they have achieved their goal. Okay, so on the surface, it looks very convoluted, it looks very confusing, very hard to follow, right? So when we are giving our data presentations, what do you think is the purpose? Just very briefly, just very short answers. What do you think is the purpose of giving a presentation in our context? Okay, so in the context of academics, scientists, researchers, postgraduates, what do you think the purpose of giving a presentation is? Anybody share some ideas? Dr. Rana, summarize findings in a simple way. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Provide clearer view in the simplest and fastest way. Okay, Dr. Adam, for people's understanding. All right, thank you. Convey information. Yes, you are all correct. And I think one of the main reasons why scientific presentations or academic presentations tend to be viewed as rather dry or maybe a bit boring is because many people think that their presentation should be a mirror image of a written document. So either the presentation has to mirror the thesis or the presentation has to mirror a scientific publication, all right? But in actuality, your presentation shouldn't actually be fully extracted from a piece of written work, all right? So when it comes to written pieces of work, like a report, a case study, journal articles, and especially for postgraduates, your thesis, all right? Those written documents are meant to provide a detailed description of your research project, okay? A very detailed look into your research project. But for a presentation, you only need to communicate your key findings. And I think this is the important thing that everybody has to be aware of. It is your key findings that you need to present, as well as your insights. And the ultimate purpose is to engage and inform the audience, like Adila Fauzi mentioned, to convey information. All right. So all the scientific methodological data is already present in written reports. So when you are giving a presentation, you only need to focus on the key findings, the most important aspects of your research. Okay, but having said that, like I mentioned earlier, academics, scientists, researchers, we generally have a reputation for giving bad presentations, all right? This little snapshot is what I took from Reddit. I can't stand scientists giving bad talks, okay? So it is a very common perception. So why do academics, why do scientists and researchers, why do we tend to give bad, or should I say poor presentations, right? So there may be several reasons. One is that we tend to focus more on the content, right? So we care more about what we are presenting and less so perhaps about how we present it. So because we focus more on the what, we don't give enough emphasis on the how. So that may be one issue. Second issue, which is what we are trying to address today, a lack of training. Okay, again, researchers, postgraduates, we tend to undergo a lot of training for research skills, okay, but maybe not enough training for presentation skills. So that is something we are trying to achieve today. Conforming to academic norms may also be another reason. As the generations have passed, one thing that is common is that the academic profession or the scientific community seems to be very professional. And because of that, we may think that our presentations also need to mirror that image. So this may be one reason as well. And of course, time constraints. This is very common, especially in academic settings. We just don't have enough time to make a very visually appealing presentation. So because of that, we just do the bare minimum when it comes to designing the presentation. And so we end up having a presentation which perhaps lacks a little bit of that visual emphasis, right? And if you have any other theories or any other ideas about why we tend to give not so good presentations, please just share your feedback, right? So now that we've touched a little bit on why academicians tend to give rather dry or poor presentations, I think before we touch about how to give better presentations, it's important for us to know why good design is important for scientific presentations. Okay. So the first I want to touch on is the cognitive load theory. This, in simplest terms, means that if information is well organized, it becomes easier to understand or easier to comprehend. So when you are giving a scientific presentation with a lot of data, your audience needs to be able to absorb that data, right? But if your data is presented in a very flabbergasted way, or if your data is not organized in a very sequential manner, it may be a bit more difficult for your audience to understand, right? You do not give the audience a chance to actually absorb your results because they are too busy trying to understand the flow of information on your slides, right? So like this example here, when translating language, right, the way you arrange those languages on paper can help students to better understand it and not have to worry about rearranging those letters or those words in the head, right? Siu mentioned that we do not consider the audience expectation and understanding. Yes, that is correct also. We tend to prepare presentations just in our own bubble, right? We don't really give much consideration to who we are presenting to. And that can also lead to us preparing inappropriately designed slides when we are presenting our research. The second theory is the dual coding theory. And this is not just true for like giving presentations, but it's also true for like teaching, right? So verbal in this case can be both spoken as well as written, okay? So basically text and images, when they are combined, they give your audience a much easier platform to understand your theories, to understand your data, right? So in this example here, I have an image and I also have a brief description on the bottom to say that 3 in 5 people are red. Okay, so when you combine more than one channel, it actually helps your audience to understand your data better. And the picture superiority effect, I think this is one that's very common, that's very well known. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm sure many of us have heard this saying before. Apparently, some studies have found out that if you are seeing a new piece of information for the first time, if it is only through text or if it is only through audio, apparently your brain only processes it about 10%. But if you combine both text and picture, then it increases to 65%. I'm not sure of the actual scientific reason behind this, but I did find this mentioned quite a lot. So use pictures whenever you can instead of text, and it may help your audience to understand your data. And lastly, this is one thing which I think many people do tend to not really do, is minimizing noise to increase the emphasis on the signal. All right. So in this case, the noise would be a lot of suboptimal or perhaps data in your presentations that's not that important. And so your important data doesn't really shine in your presentation, right? If you minimize the noise in your presentation, then you will be able to fully emphasize and highlight the important parts of your presentation and the important parts of your data, which you want people to see. Okay, so before you present your data, this is not something that we're going to touch on today, but just something that I think many people need to know is that you need to know what kind of data you are presenting. Okay, so we generally have two types of data. We have qualitative data Okay, so this is subjective data that provides insights into patterns, themes, and experiences. And then we also have quantitative data, which is more numerical, more objective. And so when we are dealing with numerical data and quantitative data, we need to present it in a way that is not too dry and that is not too boring for your audience, okay? And regardless of which type of data you use, you need to make sure that you use the correct statistical tests, okay? Because this will also determine how you present your data. If you don't use the correct statistical tests for the correct type of data, then your data presentation will just end up being confusing, right? But this is not something that we will be covering today. We will be covering more on the presentation of data, not the analysis of data. And I will also be focusing more on quantitative data. Because in my opinion, I think that the presentation of quantitative data is where scientists and academics tend to falter a bit more, just because numerical data is very objective. And so maybe they find it hard to make that data stand out in the presentations. So we will be focusing more on quantitative data today. Okay. And for this, I think there are basically just three very simple, very basic rules, which I think if we follow, we should be able to improve our data presentation. Okay, and we will go through all three of these after this. All right, the first is to choose the right chart. Okay, there have been instances in my experience where people presented their data using inappropriate charts, and so it made the data a little bit more confusing to understand. Okay, so we will go through a few of the very basic charts after this and the situations in which that they are suitable. Okay, I won't go into every single chart available because that will take too much time. I will just cover some of the most basic types of charts, right? The second rule is to keep it simple. Okay, keeping your presentations simple is also an area where I have seen many academics and students, researchers struggle. I will touch on this a bit more in detail later, but basically, I feel like because of the earlier slide when I mentioned about here, the focus on content, I think that many people, they feel the more content they put on the slide, the better. Like they put all their data on the slide and then they'll go look at all my data, you know, especially for students. Because students feel the need, I feel, students are of the impression that they need to show their examiners how much work they have done. And in order to show how much work they have done, they just put all their results in the presentation. But this may actually backfire because if you put all your results on your slides, your most significant results may not be able to stand out. And this is one of the things which we will focus on in a while. All right, keeping your presentations simple. And lastly, designing with purpose. I won't talk too much about the overall design of your presentation because that I believe is a more generic kind of area to focus on. All right, the designing of a presentation. But I will touch a little bit more on the designing of your data. Okay, if that makes sense. How to present your data so that it is both aesthetically pleasing, all right, and also the design will serve a purpose. Okay, most times when people design their slides, I believe they do so to make their slides look nicer, right? They don't want to just have black text on a white background because that would be very boring. So they add a few colors here, they add a few pictures there, and for aesthetic purposes, that is good, right? You want your slides to jump off the screen, to jump off and attract your audience. But this kind of addition or this kind of design doesn't have to be only for aesthetic purposes. It can also serve a purpose. It can also be functional design. So these are some tips that I will also share from my personal experience. Okay, so these three tips are just from my experience as a presenter myself and also as an audience member. To date, I think I've probably attended hundreds of different presentations, right? So these are some tips that I have compiled. But if anybody else has any other tips that you would like to share, please feel free. Okay, we're all here to learn. And if you have tips that I don't mention here, then everyone will benefit, all right, including myself. Okay, so the first one, when it comes to choosing the right graph, one of the most common is the very famous line graph. Okay, so this line graph is a perfect type of graph that you can use when you want to show how a certain set of data changes over time. Okay, now as you can see here, I have emphasized over time because I have seen some people use line graphs to display data that is static. Okay, so they do a cross-sectional study. They collect data only at one time point, but they use a line graph. So this is not the most appropriate chart to use for that kind of data. All right, so here you can see one example of a graph. Okay, we have 3 groups here. And the quantitative data that was obtained here is number of sales, and that data is grouped according to months. Okay, January, February, March, April, May. So this time frame makes line graphs more suitable. Okay, because when you look at the data points, so for example, in the control group, you have January, February here is about 12. In March, they had 38. April 30, and then in May 32. Okay, these different data points are related to one another because they are all from the control group and they are sequential from one month to the next month. So you can see the trend where from January up until March, there's a very high increase in sales, and then there's a small dip in April, and then a slight increase in May. So when you are showing the changes in your data over time, that is when it is suitable to use a line graph. And if you have multiple groups, so you have group 1 and group 2 here as well, the changes over time are a lot more easily compared, okay? Because you can see the different trends over time. For example, just from this graph, you can see in group 1, they started off rather low up until April. They had 20 sales and below each month. And then suddenly in May, they had a sharp increase to 50. Okay, so you can easily compare this graph to the graphs of the control group and the graphs of group 2. Okay, so any time frame can be used. You can use hours. If, for example, if anyone is doing cell culture studies, we usually have time changes in terms of hours. You can have days, weeks, months, years. It doesn't really matter the scale of the time. As long as you have a time frame, then you can use line graphs. Right? So this is an example of data that I showed, that I mentioned earlier, where you don't have a time frame. All right, so if you look here, you have the control group, group 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you have the number of sales, okay? And this is only in one time point. This could be in a day, this could be in a month, it could be in a year. It doesn't really matter. But what does matter is that these data points are independent from one another, right? These data points are not related to one another because they are one data point is from the control group, one data point from group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. So these data points are independent from another. They're not related. But when you use a line graph, it gives the impression that this data is related, which is misleading to your audience, and they may not be able to fully understand what exactly you are trying to portray in your data. Okay. Is it advisable to use different colors or different patterns in charts? Okay, so generally, I would say yes, it is advisable to use different colors because, as we'll see later in my presentation also, colors are a very important part of a presentation, okay? And these 3 colors, actually, I chose them manually. Initially, the default colors, all 3 were blue. Right, all 3 were blue, just different shades of blue. So there was like a light blue, a medium blue, and a dark blue. But to me, that wasn't very good because the colors were very similar to each other. Okay, and as someone mentioned earlier, about how when we prepare our slides, we don't really think about the audience. We don't know if any of our audience members may have some degree of color blindness, right? It's possible, which is why when you choose colors for your presentation, it is always important to choose highly contrasting colors. So I have a light blue for the control group, a dark blue for the group 1, and then red for group 2. Okay, so different colors, I would say, are more advisable than different patterns, because patterns may be a bit blurry on your presentation if your venue has like a lower resolution monitor or a lower resolution projector, like an old projector. Different patterns may not be that visible, right? So different colors to me are more preferable. Okay, so if it is not suitable to use a line graph for this kind of data, what data is more suitable? What chart is more suitable? All right, I will show you an alternative later. But first, we will talk about pie charts. Okay, pie charts are very popular. However, I would advise not to use pie charts. All right. So before I begin, can I have a short survey, just a very short survey to see how many of you usually use pie charts in your presentations? Or how many of you did not know that pie charts are better to be avoided? Just a quick impromptu survey. Okay, most people don't know why you should avoid. Some people didn't use, someone did use, right? So generally speaking, pie charts, we use them to show a breakdown of data within a whole, right? So we have 100% of our data, and we want to showcase how that 100% is divided up, right? But pie charts actually, visually speaking, they may not be the best choice, okay? For example, this pie chart here, which shows the breakdown of different social media usage. I think this is from 2017, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, visually, the comparison is not clear. Okay, imagine if you had this pie chart without the numbers, right? Without the numbers, you wouldn't really be able to tell Facebook's share is how many percent, YouTube how many percent. And these smaller slices, it will be even more difficult for you to determine the actual percentage, right? So to overcome this not arbitrary, but to overcome this subjective viewing of the slices, we add the data, we add the numbers. But with all this data, it ends up making the chart messy, right? We need to add the text to show which which slice represents which data. And we also need to add the percentage, okay? So it makes your chart look a bit messy. And if you have a pie with many slices, you will then need many color options to differentiate them, right? So you have here alone, you have like 3 shades of blue. You have like orange, yellow, and like this dark brown, and I don't know what color this is, right? So the more slices you have, the more inappropriate a pie chart becomes, okay? And also, these small slices are difficult to label. Like only Facebook and YouTube has enough space for you to actually put the data on the slice. But for all these other smaller slices, you have to put the text off of the pie chart. And you need to have these additional lines to show which text goes to which slice, right? So ultimately, pie charts may not be the best choice for this kind of data. Instead, what other alternative can we use? Can I get some ideas or some guesses? If we have a set of data and we want to show how that data is divided into different groups, what alternative other than pie charts can we use? But any other guesses? Just one guess so far? Okay, so the alternative is to use a bar chart. Okay, I'll explain why after this. But basically, bar charts probably the most used type of chart when it comes to presenting research data, because bar charts are great for comparing values between groups, right? So this is the same data that we had in the bar chart. This pie chart and this bar chart showcase the same data. All right, it's the exact same data, just presented differently. Okay, so why are bar charts a good alternative? Firstly, the visual comparison is much clearer. Okay, because all of the lines begin on the left here and they all move in one direction towards the right, it becomes much more clearer to our audience to see which bars are bigger and which bars are smaller. And it's arranged sequentially from top to bottom. So visually, right? Visually, it is much more clearer to your audience about the breakdown of this data. The text is organized neatly. Okay, you have all the different categories on the left. You have your percentages on the bottom. So there's no mismatch or there's no messy data around a pie chart like we saw earlier. And on your behalf, as the presenter, bar charts are a lot easier for you to design. Okay, you won't have to worry about using a pie chart and choosing different colors for different slices. You won't have to worry about how to label those small slices. Okay, so this is not just a good alternative for your audience, but using these bar charts will also be a good alternative for you as a presenter, as it is much more easier for you to design. All right. Now, some people may wonder, if you're using a pie chart, right, you are showing a visual representation of a whole, right, 100%, and you can see how your data all fills up that 100%. In a bar chart like this, you don't really see the full 100% because all the bars are separate. But in my opinion, you don't really need to visually show that all this data combined makes 100%. Okay? Because if you already tell your audience that these values are a percentage, right, then they already know, oh, okay, this is 40% of 100, right? 30% of 100. So by informing them and correctly labeling your chart that this data is a percentage, that fulfills the need to inform your audience that your data is a percentage of a whole. Okay, so you no longer need to visually show it with a pie chart, which is why this kind of data in bar chart form is already good enough. Donut chart, I would say, possibly falls under the same category as a pie chart, right? It's circular. You will still need to have multiple slices and multiple colors for the donut, right? I mean, basically, they're both food items, right? Pie and donuts, they're both food. So I guess keep the food as food. And when it comes to presenting your data, just stay away from the donuts and the pies. Okay, I think, yeah, donut charts are not used as much, but I would say that donut charts have the same limitations as pie charts. Okay, Patricia? All right. So the earlier chart that I showed, which wasn't appropriate, right? This bar chart on the right is the same data as the line graph on the left. Okay, so on the right, we can see how the different values of the different groups are presented visually compared to the line graph. Okay, so the line graph, like I mentioned, it gives you a false impression that the data is all connected. But here, in the bar chart, you can clearly see that the data is separate, right? Separate entities. And it is still very clear that group 2 has the highest number of sales, while the control group has the lowest number of sales, for example, right? So if you are presenting your data without a time frame, don't use line charts, okay? Save line charts for when you are presenting data that changes over time. And if you are presenting data at one time point, the best use case would be just a traditional bar chart. Okay, I use one color scheme for this chart, but if you want, you can use multiple colors. There's no harm in that. It may give it a bit more visual aesthetic as well. All right, but if you have, okay, let's give you an example, right? Here we have 4 groups, 5 including the control, right? But let's say that this set of data is from 1 month. January, okay? And you want to present the data for 3 months. So January, February, and March. So you will have a total of 15 bars, right? In that case, a good thing to do would be keep one color for each group. So your control group could be blue, group 1 could be green, group 2 could be red, so on and so forth. And so in January, February, and March, the same groups will all have the same color bars. That will give your audience a much more clearer view of your data. So you can see, okay, the control group, which is the blue bar, in January, they had how many sales, in February, they had how many sales, in March, they had how many sales. So that consistent coloring scheme will help your audience to better understand your data, and you won't have to worry too much about them being confused about which bar belongs to which group. All right? Yeah. Okay, so this is something that I mentioned that I think many of us academics, researchers, students, we tend to have trouble in doing is keeping your presentations simple, okay? Don't fall into the trap of showing all your data to show your examiners how much work you have done, okay? Especially in the case of examinations, okay? Either for a progress report, for a thesis seminar, or even your final viva later, don't put all your data on your slides because your examiners will have your written report, right? They will have your progress report written in paper. They will have your thesis seminar maybe written up, and your viva especially, they would have read your thesis, okay? So you don't need to show them all the data you have presented. You don't need to show them all the data you have collected. You don't need to show them all the analysis that you've done because they already have it with them in their written format, okay? For your presentation, you should communicate only your key findings, which are the most important for your study. And you should also share insights and engage your audience. Okay, so this is one part which I think many of us need help with. Okay, and the root of the problem, I believe, is because as scientists, okay, it doesn't matter if you do like life sciences, okay, biology, chemistry, physics, maths, or if you do social sciences, okay, language, humanities, history, whatever kind of science you do, we are always taught to be thorough, right? And being thorough when you do your research is of course expected. But when you want to give your presentation to present the results of your research, that is when you need to simplify it. Especially if you are talking to a mixed audience where some of them may not come from your background. Okay, say you are invited to give an open talk in public on your research or something similar, your area of expertise. The people in the audience may not all be from your background, right? So if you were to give them a fully scientific presentation full of jargon and all kinds of different terminologies that they won't understand, your message will be lost to them, right? So by simplifying your presentation and by simplifying your data, you will have a better chance of successfully delivering your message to your audience. Okay, and how do you do this? Okay, so I think this part I have already covered a few times. I've mentioned it a few times already. Don't present all your data, all right? And remember one of the theories I shared earlier about the noise to signal ratio, right? If you minimize the noise on your presentations, you can then amplify the emphasis on your key findings, okay? So instead of presenting all of your data, right, all you need to do is present what you want to highlight, okay? And again, like I mentioned just now, all of your data will already be in your written reports, in your thesis, right? For your presentation, it is best if you just present what you want to highlight, especially because many of our presentations will be limited by time, only about like 15 minutes, 20 minutes to present. And if you've been doing your research for 4 or 5 years, you can't present everything in 15 to 20 minutes, right? So only present what you want to highlight. Only present the most important data that you want your audience to see. Okay? And when you have already identified what data you want to present, it's important for you to not overload your slides with all of that data. Okay? If your data is connected with one another, it's okay to show them on the same slide to show that your data is connected. But otherwise, if you spread your data out over multiple slides, it will give you the opportunity to highlight each data point or each set of data more emphatically, right? Imagine if you put all of your important data on the slide, your audience may not be able to see the significance of your data individually, okay? But if you space out your data, so you present one subset of important data on one slide, another subset on another slide, and another subset on another slide, you will then allow your audience to see the importance and the significance of your data one at a time. Okay, so not cramming your slides with all your data is also a good approach to take. And lastly, this is something I think, especially in the hard sciences, a lot of people do, is they write out their full description or their full significance of the data alongside the actual data. Okay, so you may have a bar chart or you may have a table on your slide, and then you fill the slide with all the text to show, oh, this result shows this result shows this result means this, right? Instead of doing that, because all of your text may just end up flooding out the actual data, okay? Your audience will be too busy reading your slides to be able to fully appreciate your actual data. So instead of doing that, you just have to keep your descriptions of the data very brief. All right, show your data, give a brief description on the slides, and then you yourself as the presenter can then provide more context to your audience about why this data is important. Okay, so don't write all of the data, the descriptions of the data on the slides. Okay, this may end up, like I said, this may end up drowning out your data because your audience is too busy reading your text. Okay, the last section of this webinar, like I said, is just going to be a very brief, very quick crash course because we do only have 1 hour. All right, is to design your presentations with purpose. All right, so in addition to designing your slides, it can be with colors, pictures, or you know how usually when we start presenting or when we start preparing a presentation, we can choose from a preset list of themes and everything, right? Those are usually good for aesthetic value, right? But what I want to show here is that your choices in design can also serve a practical purpose, or they can also serve a functional purpose, right? Especially nowadays with tools like Canva, Prezi, Visme, and all these other presentation tools, I don't think aesthetic design is a problem for many people. You just have to choose a template, choose a theme, right? And that is your aesthetic value for your presentation. But functional design, especially when it comes to presenting research data, I think that is something that we can improve. And by adding this functional use of colors and pictures, you can also help to emphasize your results. And it can help your audience better understand your results if you do it correctly, right? So one thing which we actually have already covered is the use of colors, right? Colors probably the most basic form of design, right? You don't want a white and black presentation, so you add colors. You make your text blue, you add like a little orange border around your slides, your bar charts, your line charts, you use different colors, right? Those are good examples. Actually, the first thing that I mentioned about using borders and making your text blue and all that, those are all like aesthetic uses of color, right? But when you use color and your data, then that becomes a functional use of color, right? So for example, you can emphasize trends in your results, right? So say for example, we have, remember the line chart from earlier? If a group's data points were generally increasing, we can write a small description of the data on the bottom. We can say, for example, group 1 experienced an increase in sales, right? Usually, most people would just keep the whole sentence either in black text, right? But if you set the font color for the word increase to green, that gives you a secondary channel of input. Okay, because generally speaking, we see green as good, right? Green is go, green is good now, right? And red is the opposite. Red is a decrease, or red is bad, for example, right? Similarly, if the value, or if say, for example, we're doing some clinical trial, right? And we are giving patients a new form of medication, and the output variable that we are measuring should increase, but instead we see a decrease. So we can say that this new treatment led to a decrease in whatever, right? So the word increase, the word decrease, we can use colors to further emphasize the trend in our results, which we want the audience to see. Okay, if the text was just one color, they will still understand it. They understand the word increase and decrease. But if you were to highlight those words, the trends, with color, it may give the slides, for one, a more visually appealing aesthetic, and it will also help emphasize the trend in your results that you want people to see. All right. Secondly, data ranges. Sometimes we have a range of data that we want to show. In this case, we can use colors to highlight the changes, right? We can have very pale or very transparencies work too. Okay, so very pale colors to represent low data. And as the data gets higher and higher, you can have brighter or you can have darker colors, right? So this kind of visual representation of your data is also very good, especially if you have a lot of data that you want to show and you want to divide them in terms of low and high values. You can use colors. Another one is to highlight outliers, right? So if you were to show a subset of data and there is one particular data point which is an outlier, you can highlight it in red color, for example, right? Say you're showing a distribution pattern. Say you're doing a histogram, right? You're doing a histogram of your... So let's say you did a questionnaire study and you distributed your questionnaire to the public and you recorded their ages in your demographics, right? You can then display the grouping of your responders by age, right? So maybe 0 to 15, 15 to 30, 30 to 45, so on and so on. And you can say that, for example, each of those groups, age groups, had a roughly similar distribution. But then suddenly, for one group, the number of responders was very high. Okay, so in your histogram, you could make that one bar red color to highlight that this particular group was an outlier because they had a significantly higher number of responders compared to the other age groups. How many different colors is suitable to be used in one slide? Sakina, thank you. I don't think there is a very steadfast or a very rigid rule when it comes to how many colors. What I would say is to keep your colors consistent and don't use colors which clash too much. Okay, if you notice in my presentation from the very beginning, the base color of my presentation has been blue, right? My text is blue, this background here is blue, headers, text is blue, these dots at the bottom is blue, these circle icons, white icon on blue background, here everything's blue, right? So what's more important, in my opinion, is not so much how many colors you use, but that the colors you use match with each other. Okay, I'm not lying when I'm telling you this. I have seen a presentation with yellow background. Okay, I mean the background, you know. So my background is white, right? I have seen presentations with yellow background. So it's not so much how many different colors, it's the choice of colors and also how your colors match with each other, which I think is more important. Okay, because if you prioritize your colors matching with each other, you won't have too many colors on your slide, right? Say your theme is blue, you can have a dark blue color for the title of your chart, for example, and then you can have light blue for the footnotes at the bottom of the chart. Your text could just be black, or maybe a different shade of blue, right? So by ensuring that your colors match well together, and by ensuring that there's no drastic clashing of colors, that itself will limit your color choice. Okay, so I would say don't choose how many colors to use, but choose your colors, again, as I'm saying here, with purpose. All right, so when you design with purpose, then you won't need to worry about how many colors you are using. Okay, Sakina, hopefully I answered your question. This is an example of how I used colors in one of my previous presentations. All right, a very simple use of colors. I just wanted to show, I can't remember what I was showing here, but basically yes and no lah, right? So instead of writing yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, I decided to use icons. So a check mark and a cross mark. And instead of keeping those symbols black, I use color, right? Green for the check marks and red for the crosses. Okay, so this is a very simple use of color that can, one, make your slides a bit more colorful instead of just being black and white, and also functional. Green means go, right? Green means good. Red, not so good, right? Pictures, another very common way to make your presentations look more visually appealing. But if you can intelligently use pictures to replace text, then that will be a bonus. Okay, so not only will these pictures make your presentations look nicer, but they can also help you to reduce the amount of text you use on your slides. Okay, this is from another one of my previous presentations. Okay, I wanted to highlight some of these observations from different studies, and these studies came from different countries, right? One very basic and maybe a bit rudimentary way would be to just do a simple point form presentation, right? South Korea, prevalence of moderate or severe periodontitis, da 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 da. Next PowerPoint, Germany, subjects with RA, da 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 da. And then USA, another bullet point. And then Netherlands, another bullet point, right? That would just be a text with bullet points. So that would be like a bit boring lah, right? In my opinion. So instead, what I did, I used each nation's flag as a background for that study. Okay, so I use the Korean flag, Germany flag, American flag, Netherlands flag as a background. So this way, when I present the data, I can say, in this study from South Korea, in this study from Germany, and as the audience is looking at my slides, their attention will be pulled towards the text. They won't need to read which country this study came from. All right, one moment, yeah, Susan. Okay, so and additionally, I just want to highlight, if you do choose to do something like this, it is important to make sure that your text is legible. Okay, these flags which I use as a background, I reduce the I increase the transparency. Okay, I made them more transparent so that the text will be very visible. Okay, if the text, if the flags were just full 100% normal pictures, it will be very difficult to read this text, right? So if you do want to use your pictures for the background, it is always important to make sure that your text is legible. How can we present findings from an inferential test graphically? Like using findings from t-test, binary linear regression, is it possible graphically? This is a very difficult question to answer. T-test, binary logistic regression. I think for t-test, I believe you usually compare means, right? Binary logistic regression is not a comparison of means. Binary logistic regression, I think, is you want to show which factors have a stronger impact on your outcome, I believe, right? Yeah, so the charts that I showed earlier, those were more direct charts, right? You use them to showcase values that you're comparing between means and stuff like that. I would say graphically, maybe not. But here's one thing I would say. Forgive me, Susan, if this doesn't answer your question directly, but when presenting your data, be creative in a sense that you don't always need to use charts. Okay, most data will use charts, of course. It depends on what data you have. It depends on what kind of statistical test you use, like I mentioned early on, right? But in some cases, you may not need graphs or you may not need charts to show your data, okay? In some cases, you can just use a little like an icon or a graphic, okay? For example, let's just say you're doing a multiple linear regression analysis to see how 5 different factors contribute to one output. Okay, and I believe when it comes to these kind of analysis, you have different values for each of those factors, which showcases how each one or how much each one contributes to the outcome, right? So instead of doing that in a graphical representation, what you could do is you could find images which represent those 5 factors, put them on your slides, and then put those associated values with each factor, if that makes sense, right? So let's say you have 5 factors contributing to one output. You want to see which factor contributes the most to your output, right? You could find images or any kind of graphics or photos which represents those factors. And then your data, you just put it as a small little text number next to your pictures. Okay, that may be one example. Right? Okay, thank you, Sue. So yeah, be creative with your presentation. Don't limit yourself to only using graphs or bar charts and stuff like that. Okay. The important thing is that your message is delivered to your audience. So if you do it in a less traditional way, as long as the message is delivered, I think that's fine. Okay, but of course, this is very on a case-to-case basis. What works for one type of data may not necessarily work with a different type of data. Okay, moving on. This is another example from one of my previous presentations. Basically, what I wanted to show here is that bacteriophages have a protective effect. Okay, bacteriophages are basically viruses, can be found in our oral cavity. Okay, and they can be protective in the sense that they can help prevent oral infection from pathogens, okay, from harmful bacteria. So instead of saying bacteriophages can be protective, what I did was I just put all this text inside this icon of a shield to show that this is a protective aspect of bacteriophages. So this is another example of how you can make your presentations look nicer, but also those design choices can also be functional and purposeful. Okay. Lastly, very quickly before we finish, when you present your data, I would recommend to do it in the sense that you are telling a story. Okay, you have your introduction, your methodology, your results, your discussion, and all that. Tell it in a story so that everybody will be able to understand what your research is about. Okay, and when telling your story, your data are your characters. Okay, so people care about characters when we're talking about stories, right? When we watch movies, we watch TV shows, right? The characters are the most important part of the story. And so our data being the most important part of our research, that is those are our characters. And how you present your data, that is the plot. Okay, even if a story has great characters, but the presentation or the plot doesn't make sense, then your audience will end up feeling just confused by the end or angry. Okay. Remember Game of Thrones? Everybody loves the characters, but everybody hated season 8 because the plot was bad, right? So that is an example. Even if your data is good, if you present it in a way that is confusing, your audience and your examiners may end up being confused, right? And lastly, the significance of your data is the resolution to your story, okay? It's not enough to simply show people your data. You need to also tell them why your data is significant, okay? So this is one example of how I designed one of my slides. The title, I wrote the observation of this data, okay? Some people, for the titles, they would put results, right? You can do that, but I don't think it is beneficial, because if you are showing your results, people know it's your results, right? So instead, what I did was I put the results and discussion in the bottom left corner, just to consistently show people which section of my presentation this is, right? So for the title, you put your observation, and this will already give your audience a sense of what you are presenting. They will already know, oh, okay, he's presenting about a dynamic bacteriophage and bacteria ecosystem. Okay, so your observation of your results can be the title for the slide. I showed one bar chart and one table here. I highlighted the significant data that I wanted to show with a green square, right? And on the bottom, I showed how this data is significant. I showed that the bacteriophage has a two-way relationship with the bacterial host, and this bacterial host has a two-way relationship with periodontal indicators or clinical indicators. Okay, so when you tell a story with your data, then your audience will be more, it will be easier for them to understand your data and to also understand the significance of your data. Right? So that was it. Just 1 minute over. So I think that was good timing. All right. So just to wrap up, remember the purpose of a presentation. Okay. Don't present your thesis in your presentation. Okay. Take the most important parts from your thesis and present that instead. Okay. Don't do everything. Okay. And by doing so, you will be able to make your data shine. Okay. Highlight your data in the way that a story highlights its characters. All right. And that leads to our third point, tell a story. So when you tell a story, people will be able to understand your data, and they will also be able to understand why your data is important. Right. So that was it. Thank you to everyone for attending and for listening. You can see more or learn more about me from my website, socials, okay? And this is all professional, you can say. It's not personal. So all work-related, academic-related, research-related stuff, okay? So my Instagram and my Threads account also professional content, academic content. So it's not no personal ranting about politics or anything like that. So if you're interested in following or learning more about me, you can do so here. All right. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dr. Ngoy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasly. Very, very clear presentation on. Thank you so much for the tips for everyone to present their data in the future. So do we have any more questions from the audience? All right. Thank you, everyone. Well, just a quick question from me, Dr. Jasly. Because
Sure.
your presentation seems to be focused on slide presentation, right? So there is quite a lot of students, there are quite a lot of students presenting poster in conferences. And everyone seems to be, because poster, like it should be standalone by itself, and then everyone seems to be adding too much words on it. How would you advise on this? Yeah,
I would say of course posters are a bit more tricky compared to presentations, because presentations you can have multiple slides to showcase your data. Like you said, posters should be able to stand alone. So even if the presenter is not there, if somebody were to come and read the poster, they should be able to get a gist of what is important, right? But from afar, okay, just imagine that you, as a participant in a conference, if you were to look at a poster and you see that there's walls of text, you might just walk past it thinking, I don't have time to read all of that, right? So I think the important thing here is to keep a balance. And yes, you can apply many of the same aspects that I shared earlier, like using visuals in place of words. Instead of saying, for example, the data showed an increase over time, you can perhaps just show your data and then show an up arrow, green color, maybe, for example. Any way that you can creatively replace text, either with symbols or with pictures, or any way that you can reduce the length of your text, that would be good. So I would say, instead of writing out, because the thing is, when people read your posters, they can form their own inferences from the data. Because most people who participate in these kind of research conferences, they themselves are researchers, right? So unlike a written report or unlike your thesis, you don't need to write full sentences on your poster all the time, right? Instead of saying, the data showed an upward trend from the months of January to February, which is something like a proper sentence, you can just show an arrow that shows from January to February, the data went up. So that will help to simplify the text. It will help to shorten the text, okay? Because when people read that, they will understand it already, right? So you don't need to write out. Of course, you do need to write some full sentences on the poster. So that's why I say it's a balancing act. You need to be able to balance what you need to write in full and what you don't need to write in full. So that I think will come with experience and maybe some training, right? I saw one question asking what version of PowerPoint. Actually, I'm using Canva. Yeah, so I'm using Canva. I pay for the professional version because I give a lot of presentations like this webinar. So to me, I think it's worth it. But even if you use the free version of Canva, I think that is enough already. They have a lot of assets that you can use. And like I mentioned at the beginning also, I didn't want to touch too much on the technical aspects of presenting data, like how to do charts, how to do presentations, because I think that is something that we can learn ourselves with all these tools, making it a lot simpler, right? But to answer your question, Ali, I was just using Canva. Yeah.
Actually, I was about to ask the same question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would. But in my opinion, the tools you use don't make a difference if you still design them badly, right? If you use Canva, but you still put a lot of text on the screen, it's not going to make a difference. Canva cannot help you in that case, right? Which is why I chose for this webinar not to focus on the technical aspects of designing, but rather the concepts behind designing and presenting data, which I think is more important. Advantages, Dr. Rana. Yes, I would say there's quite a lot of advantages. For starters, you have a huge, I think Canva's biggest, I'm not promoting, I'm not a paid partner or anything, just in my experience. Canva, the biggest advantage is that they have a huge asset library. Okay, so most of the things in my presentation, they were all from Canva. Okay, so these icons, what else? Yeah, this book, this graphic of the book turning pages, all from Canva. This for science, especially for biomedical science, we have a lot of these biological molecules and stuff in Canva. So if you want these images for your presentation, many of them are available in Canva. So that would be one advantage, I would say. In terms of actually designing the PowerPoint compared to Canva, like designing your presentation, I think they're both very similar. Canva perhaps makes it a bit easier because it was designed with a more modern take. So I think Canva is a little bit easier. You can do all this stuff in PowerPoint, of course, just that if you're looking for these images, you may need to like download them to your computer and then upload them to PowerPoint. So that may be a little bit of an extra step. But yeah, I would say the biggest advantage Canva has is that it has a huge asset library, which can help you make your presentations more visually appealing. Is it easier to construct graphs, tables with PowerPoint versus Canva? One disadvantage of Canva, which I think is very significant for this webinar, the tools for data presentation are very bad. Like the bar chart I showed earlier. Okay, the bar chart I showed earlier, this one on the right, I don't think Canva supports error bars, right? Which is something very important for data presentation, okay? Maybe it does, I didn't see it, maybe. But to the best of my knowledge, Canva's data presentation tools are meant to be very simple, are meant to be very rudimentary. So when you are constructing graphs, even tables in Canva is not very friendly, I would say. It's like very basic. So my suggestion would be to use either Excel or any kind of, there's a lot of specific graphing software out there which you can use, okay? So when it comes to charting or presenting your data in tables and in graphs, my suggestion would be to use other software. For example, you don't need to use the special kind of software also. You can just use Excel. Excel is very good at data presentation. Use those to present your data, or use those to create your data points, create your bar charts, create your tables, right? And then import those into Canva. Okay, because your charts, for example, your bar charts will need error bars, either the standard deviation or the standard error of the mean, right? So you will need those tools like Excel, for example, and you can just copy the chart into Canva or into PowerPoint when you're presenting. Yeah.
So one of the, I wouldn't say this is a problem, but I do came across students using 3D bar charts to present their data. Personally, I don't find it very appealing and clear. So what is your advice on this? Yeah.
I would, in this case, I would bring up my final point. This one about designing with purpose. A 3D bar chart, or even earlier, this 3D pie chart, right? You can look at this as an example. Okay, the 3D pie chart or 3D bar chart. The 3D element doesn't really do anything, right? It doesn't make the data stand out more. It literally like doesn't serve a purpose.
Yeah.
So yeah, so in my opinion, I think similar to you, Dr. Ngoy, there's no need to add 3D for an aesthetic effect. I mean, there's no harm in it. It's not, as long as it doesn't make your data more difficult to read, then that's fine. But I would always prioritize designing with purpose. So if, of course, you can design just for aesthetic reasons. Like you can have, like one of my slides earlier or later showed, like here, I put a blue background for my slide titles. This was just to highlight like, this is my title. And all of my slides had the blue background to as a background for the title. So this is, of course, it's mostly an aesthetic design. It's just to add some color to the slides. But at the same time, I use it to highlight my titles. So whenever you want to make a design decision, I would suggest to do so, if possible, with some kind of functionality, with some kind of purpose. But otherwise, if you want to do it just for aesthetics, that's perfectly fine also, as long as it doesn't take away from your presentation. If you make a design choice which makes your data harder to read, like a yellow background, like I mentioned earlier, then that's a bad design choice.
And a dark background is a no-no too.
Yeah, that's one trend that a lot of people like to do now. I think it's because a lot of our mobile apps and websites have gone dark. Like a lot of our apps now have dark mode because like you're looking at the screen throughout the day, so they don't want to have like bright white lights and everything. So this design trend has also seeped into presentations where people tend to have dark backgrounds with white text. For some people, that might be okay, but I think generally speaking, having a white background with your color standing out is more aesthetically pleasing and perhaps also more functional compared to having a black background and having the colors come out from that black background. Because colors on the black background may not look that good. Like imagine if this slide, instead of a white background, imagine if it had a black background, right? So for starters, the blue wouldn't be seen very visibly. I would need to have used a lighter shade of blue, all right? And my black text here might not be, I mean, it wouldn't really look as nice to have a dark background. So this is just a personal opinion. I like to have clean white backgrounds and have my text and my elements come out with color. But that's just like my design choice. Green background. Green background.
Maybe a very light shade of green.
Yeah, very light shade. Yeah, I would say. Generally speaking, I mean, like again, just repeating what I've said, I personally prefer white backgrounds because it's the easiest to get contrast with for your text and also for your images, for any colors. It looks better on a white background. Using a green background, say it's a very light green shade, okay, not a dark green, but a light green shade, For starters, it may give you a little bit more difficulty in choosing font colors or design or the colors of your elements. Like if you were to have arrows, sorry, if you were to have arrows on your presentation to show a relationship between two things, that arrow would need to be able to stand out on a green background, right? With a white background, you can use blue arrows, red arrows, green arrows, red arrows, any color will work with white background. But with a green background, you are limiting which colors you can use, right? So I'm not going to say that it's not advisable. I'm just suggesting that it may give you a little bit more of a headache when it comes to choosing other colors which go with your presentation if you use a colored background. All right, Josie, hopefully that's a acceptable answer.
Yeah.
Right?
Talking about green, right?
Okay, good.
I agree with you that most of the time for presentation purpose, I prefer to use red to show to highlight something that is negative, and then green to highlight something that is more positive, right? So, but as far as I know, we have a lot of red green color blind in our population. So yeah, so there was once that someone advised me not to use a red green for contrast. So if let's say red green is not the best choice that we have, what other colors we can use?
Well, generally red and greens, like we said, and universally also, like even traffic lights, green is go, red is stop, right? If you were to choose any other colors, blue might be good. Blue may be good for good also. I think if you want to choose alternate colors from green and red, it doesn't really matter what color you choose as long as it is consistent. So if you are presenting a bunch of data, say for example, like Josie said, say you use blue to show an increase on one slide, don't suddenly use green to show an increase on a different slide, right? So if you choose to change your colors, you can do so. Just keep it consistent. And this is also why I suggested the dual coding, right? If you have visual and also verbal, it will help your audience understand things more clearly. So say, for example, you use the color green to show an increase, right? But some people may not be able to visually see the color green because of a certain degree of color blindness. If you made an upwards arrow green color, then not being able to see the green is okay because they can still see the up arrow. So it's like kind of like a safety net, right? Similarly with text, if you use the word increase and make that color green, they may not be able to see the green, but they can still see the word, increase. So it's kind of like a safety net, right? Some people, maybe their vision might not be that good if it's like a big hall and they can't really see the text that well. So they may not be able to read that clearly, but they can see the color, they can see the arrow. That might be good also. So that's why dual coding your observations, dual coding your data can be helpful also, in addition to being an aesthetic improvement.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your advice. So we are almost 20 minutes past 12. Do we have any further questions from the audience? If we don't have any more questions, I don't want to drag our time anymore. Thank you very much, Dr. Jasli. Thank you for your sharing.
Thank you, everyone, for your attendance, and thank you for your participation. I asked at the beginning for everyone to be active in the chat box, and I got that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. Bye, Dr. Ngoy.
Bye.